everyone, my name is Arabella and I am a Women's Heritage Intern with the LA Conservancy, and I'm also a PhD candidate at USC. Right now I'm standing in front of the Hollyhock House, which thanks to a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, I was able to research women's representation, specifically Aline Barnsdall, and her role in creating this beautiful home.
This summer I studied 43 different historic cultural monuments, or HCMs, here in LA County. The goal was to understand the general premise that women's history is severely underrepresented. And today I'm going to be taking you to some of those sites. They're examples of how women's history has been represented in a variety of ways, from telling great stories of the women who've contributed to Los Angeles, to stories that just relegate them to footnotes and misrepresent them altogether. In partnership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Where Women Made History initiative, the LA Women's Landmark Project is actively working to address these disparities in the HCM process. This includes taking a look at places that have already been designated, like the Hollyhock House. Most people really only think of Frank Lloyd Wright and his iconic architecture when they think of the Hollyhock House. But in reality, Aline Barnsdall was the visionary behind the entire project. And although Aline is often only portrayed as a generous benefactor that commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright, she was actually deeply involved in the development and design. For example, the name of the house is actually an homage to her favorite flower, the hollyhock.
Hi, so on our next stop of our tour of women's heritage here in Los Angeles, I'm standing in front of this public storage facility, and it's actually the site of one of the original buildings of Mack Bennett Studios. They were known for producing many comedies in the silent film era, and notably Mabel Normand, who is an actress, producer, and director, filmed some of those in this very studio. She is actually credited with not only the founding of the studio, but for its growth and popularity, and she later went on to run her own production company. One of my favorite facts about her is that she's actually credited as the co-creator of the famous pie in the face gag, which I will be sharing at every party from now on as my fun fact. Unfortunately, she's not included in the nomination for the site and is definitely worth recognition. So we're here at our next stop, which is called the Women's Building. It was originally built for the Standard Oil Company, which was one of the largest oil producers in California. So this building had a second life at what was called the Women's Building, which was a feminist art collective, which was actually credited for the growth of the feminist art movement in the 1970s and 80s. And one of their main features was they actually liked to feature lesbian artists and artists who depicted the life of lesbian women. It shows this great intersectional history of Los Angeles, and here it is, this little piece of history. So one of the great things about this building is that it tells the layered story of Los Angeles, which was what we want to see in historic cultural monuments. It started off telling the story of LA's development, and it later transformed into telling the story of a feminist art collective. So right now I'm standing in the lobby of the Garment Capitol building. It was built in 1926, and it's a great example of an HCM that is designated specifically for women's history. It was commissioned by Florence Kassler, who in the early 19th century was one of the few women who worked in real estate development. She actually had quite a significant footprint in the building of Los Angeles' downtown.
Here in the Fashion District in downtown, Kassler was a driving force behind 7 high-grade buildings, all of which shared the same sense of style and elegance.
What I find really interesting in the nomination is that there's a brief mention of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union strike potentially happening here on this building. So it's not included in the designation, but I think moving forward, it's one of those pieces of history that we want to highlight in an already great HCM nomination. So right now we're in the Bradbury building, which in my opinion is one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. And so it's no surprise that it's designated as an HCM for its architectural significance. It's also designated for its association with Lewis Bradbury, who actually commissioned the building, and it's actually one of the oldest remaining commercial structures here in Los Angeles. So what's not as well known about this building is that Lewis Bradbury's wife, Simona Martinez, was actually involved in commissioning in the design process and overseeing the construction. And not only that, but after Bradbury's death, she actually took over his real estate holdings and business projects. So she's not reflected in the historical record the way that the architecture or that her husband is, but it's partially because of her that we have to thank for this beautiful building. So many of the early HCMs, like the Bradbury building, don't actually have a formal nomination. They were simply added on. And so what this means is that there wasn't research or a written significant statement that went into arguing why this building is significant. And so these HCMs need more research and need more ways to tell the story of diverse Angelenos who actually made this place important.
But I hope that you'll follow the work of the LA Conservancy and the National Trust as they address how we can create a more gender equitable model for new historic cultural monument designations.